Hey everyone, welcome again to Disaster Hack. I'm glad to have you with us. Let's go. So today we're going to talk about human behavior in disasters. What do people think about disasters and how do they react when a stressful experience like a disaster occurs? That's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to be able to predict human attitudes and behavior, and hopefully this will help us be more effective in preparedness and response operations. So one of the first things we need to be aware of is that people have some unique attitudes about disasters. They believe a disaster is not going to happen. Or if it happens, it'll affect someone else, not me. Then they'll say, if it does affect me, it won't be that bad, and I'll be able to deal with it. Finally, they'll say, if it's really bad, there's nothing I could have done differently, or the government or someone else will take care of me. Those are some challenging attitudes that we have to deal with in emergency management. So what's the implication? You're going to have your work cut out for you. You're going to have to convince people that disasters will occur and that they will need to spend money on emergency management and prepare and mitigate those type of activities in the future. So, secondly, I wanted to discuss disaster myths. There's some common myths that are portrayed in the media and also in news organizations, and these include the following: panic, looting, price gouging, role abandonment, and shock. So first of all, there's panic. The belief is that when a disaster will occur, people will not think rationally. They'll run out of a building or into the streets, or they'll drive rapidly in their vehicle to get away from some impending disaster. Secondly, there's a belief that looting will occur. People will find the property of others and take it, or even break into buildings and take other people's belongings. The next belief is price gouging, that when disasters occur, there will be scarcity of supplies and resources, so people will take advantage of victims. For example, if there's no electricity and no ice, the people vending ice who have it will sell it at an inflated cost. A fourth belief is that there will be role abandonment. What this means is that our first responders, such as police, fire, EMS personnel, will not do their job. They'll be interested in caring for themselves or their families and not fulfill their obligations to society. And then finally, there's a belief in shock, that victims will be overwhelmed with a disaster, and that as a result, they won't be able to function or respond or recover when a disaster takes place. Well, those are myths, or at least exaggerations. Actual behavior is much different than what you see on the news or in movies from Hollywood. So people generally don't panic in a disaster. Panic occurs under very unique circumstances when people's avenue of escape is closing and they know that their life is in danger, and so they do engage in competitive life-saving behavior. But most of the time that doesn't occur. And in fact, people often downplay risk. So when people are asked to evacuate, many of them will stay home and put their life in jeopardy. And we certainly saw that with Hurricane Ian. Well, the vast majority of people don't loot or price gouge either. Instead, they're providing assistance to disaster victims, and they support them instead. It's very rare that responders will abandon their roles. Instead, they're very dedicated. In fact, too dedicated. Emergency responders will work long hours, multiple days in a row. They won't take breaks. They will do all they can to help and assist people who have been affected by disasters and others who are victims of emergencies and catastrophes. Finally, it's true that victims may be stressed and even distressed, but they often act rationally. They will do everything they can to rebound and recover from disaster situations. So what this means is that there's not a lot of antisocial behavior in disasters. Yes, there might be some, but the more common pattern is altruism. In the research literature, this has been described as a therapeutic community, a synthetic community, a utopian community, where people come together to work and assist and help one another in light of their needs. Others have described it as a mass assault. There's so many people that come to the scene of a disaster that it can be overwhelming to deal with all of those responders and the personnel and the volunteers. Well, that brings up two other important concepts that are very common in disaster sociology. One of them is emergence. Emergence occurs when people recognize a need and fulfill that obligation. So, for instance, in 9/11, there were a lot of people who were trying to evacuate or who were injured. And what we saw is that everyday people took on roles to help others evacuate or to provide them some basic first aid until first responders could come and care for them or take them to the hospital. So that's a good example of emergence. Another example is the Cajun Navy after Hurricane Katrina. When this hurricane occurred, there was substantial flooding, and a lot of people were isolated and trapped on rooftops or in trees or what have you. And so everyday citizens just got their boats and went out and started rescuing people. So they participated in search and rescue operations, even though that's not their normal function. So emergence is when everyday people take on new roles and responsibilities, in this case, in a disaster situation, helping others. Well, another important concept that is out there in the disaster literature is convergence. And what this means is that people and resources will flow to the scene of a disaster. So volunteers will come and serve and help and assist in any way they can. First responders will arrive and fulfill their important roles. And then others will come to restore electricity, as you can see below in the left corner, or supplies and resources like water and food may be sent to the disaster scene. Those are all examples of convergence as known in the disaster literature. So, does this really matter? Do we need to understand human behavior and attitudes? Yes, absolutely. We need to understand that there might be some resistance or apathy in terms of emergency preparedness and planning to begin with. And secondly, we need to understand human behavior carefully because it's not always as is portrayed in the news and in Hollywood. Our understanding, if we have a correct understanding, that can help us to be more resilient in a disaster operation. Have a great day.